Patch 14 has seen audio changes like none other, and today I'll be showing you 11 tips so that you will know when you can be heard and at what range in a ton of different circumstances. First and foremost, with the headset range on regular movement. If you've been following the community closely over the last month or so, you'll likely be aware that headsets are generally much tighter now in terms of performance than they were before, meaning that the distance that you can hear players with the best headsets is fairly similar to the worst, at least compared to how it used to be. Now, let's just begin with a big caveat here. Audio ranges are specific to each person and how their audio is set up, what headset you wear in real life, and how high you dare to put the volume. So these numbers won't be precisely bang on for you specifically, but they will give a good idea. Also remember that your level of perception affects this too. Mine is 18, which according to the game translates to 5.4% hearing distance difference. So to start with, we have the regular movements running underweight, which starts at 63 meters from contact force. Down to 53 meters with no headset on at all. As this used to range between 49 and 77 meters, you can see that the spread here is a lot tighter now. Walking underweight is 59 meters with the contact force. And this goes down to 52 meters with no headset. Slow walking is a 54 meter distance with the contact force. Which goes down to a 32 meter distance without a headset at all, which is probably a bigger gap than most of the others. The one comment that I would make about this last one in general is that when you are slow walking, sometimes it can be difficult to hear it from a distance with some of the worst headsets, which is why I think that the range is higher on this than on the others. With regular walking, there's a relatively sharp footstep sound that plays somewhere in amongst the audio, and it makes it quite obvious that somebody's moving about, whereas on slow walk, that doesn't really happen. This makes it much harder to hear in amongst the background noise, even when you've got the wind set to low in co-op offline like I did. This is yet another reason why the testing is a little bit nuanced, because the wind comes and goes these days, and that combines with the ambient compression on each headset as well to make it harder or easier to hear enemy footsteps. So the table isn't a completely fixed set of numbers for all circumstances. On to number 2, which is sneaking or crouch walking, or crabbing as it's often fondly known, which is one of the extremely hot topics in the game and probably instigated this whole thing. As a reminder, minimum speed crouch walking was previously totally silent on all surfaces except for glass and snow. So where did we get to now? A regular crouch at full speed, walking underweight, that ranges from 16 meters down to 13. If we now instead crouch underweight at the minimum speed, this then goes from 15 meters for the contact force down to 10 with no headsets on at all. The takeaway here is that it doesn't really make that much difference anymore to slow crouch. You may as well just crouch at full speed, because people are going to hear you from practically the same distance away, and you're a lot quicker when you're moving in that mode. Slow walking is about 10 meters quieter than regular walking, but as we saw, it's still audible at a fairly long distance of 40 to 50 meters if the person who's listening is being very, very careful. At this point in the testing, given that the range and the ordering of the headsets is pretty clear, I decided to run the rest of the tests just using a Contact 4, the Contact 2s, and no headset at all to save a bit of time. On to number 3, which is moving when overweight. Previously, overweight running was audible up to 90 meters away, and I tested this on a 40.9 kilogram level 1 PMC, a completely fresh account in fact, because I was using my second account to do this. Now, with the Contact 4s, you can hear up to 68 meters, down to 61 with the contact 2s, and 55 meters with no headset at all. Swapping over to walking overweight instead, we've now got a 63 meter range with the contact 4s, and this is only 5 less than running, which moves down to 57 with the contact 2s, which is 4 meters less, and 52 with no headset, which is 3 meters less. This difference between running and walking has always struck me as not big enough, and I think that running and walking should be much, much further apart. As we can see here, crouching overweight goes from 17 meters with the contact 4s down to 13 meters as the full range with no headset at all. So you can probably imagine that walking overweight should be somewhere around the mid-40s rather than the 50s to low 60s. Same goes with walking underweight. I think this should probably be in the low 40s rather than up in the 50s and 60s as well, in my opinion, because it's just so close to running that you don't really receive that much incentive for walking like you used to. Number 4 is sneaking on unusual surfaces. Next, I decided to test out a few other random things like slow crouch on metal and wood, for example, which, as we said previously, made no sound before. For metal, this actually sounded quieter to me than on regular ground, with 13 meters down to 11 meters with no headset, and I think this is simply because the metal sound effect is just very, very light when you're not moving much. I can kind of see that, right? Walking on a rocky path in real life, you'd be moving the stones and gravel with your feet, even going slow, whereas on metal, it's a completely smooth surface. For wood, this did end up being louder than regular flooring, with 16 meters with the contact 4s, down to 13 with no headset at all. As far as I could tell, glass was identical to wood in terms of its audible distance, and for this one, I did a further check overweight, which moved the range up to 18 with contact 4s, (16 with the contact 2s, and 15 with nothing. You probably get the idea at this point. Number 5, spinning while being still continues to be a really bad idea. I decided to look at the crouch spinning sound effect. This is when you are stationary and are crouched and you turn your character around. This makes a foot crunch noise on the floor that is actually really, really loud, 25 meters with the contact 4s. This decreases down to 19 with no headset at all, but this is further than the audibility of crouch walking itself whilst underweight at full speed. So when you're crouching, you're probably better off just moving and turning whilst underweight than you are turning while stationary. As most players of Tarkov know by now, you can prevent the foot crunch by simply moving as you turn, and this won't make any extra crunchy sounds, it'll just make the normal walking sounds instead. So keep that in mind given that it has a shorter range. Number 6 is on bushes. I wanted to test the bush sound effect when you're moving through foliage because this is well known to be pretty horrendous, and yep, this is at 39 meters with the contact 4s. Interestingly, it was pretty much independent of whatever headset you were wearing. Any of them was around 39 and no headset was 37, so it's very, very similar and also doesn't matter whether you're crouched or stood up. Prone seemed to be very slightly less, with 38 to 34 meters as the range, but it's still a really long way. This is approximately the same audibility as slow walking underweight with a weak headset, so avoid bushes at all costs. To note here, changing stance in a bush from being crouched to standing up doesn't actually make any sound at all. Number 7, moving while prone. Given we're on the topic, movement along the floor is still really loud. So that's 30 meters with the contact 4s, down to 23 meters with no headset. But one quirk here is that when you're prone, you don't make any sound at all when you're turning. It's only when you're moving along the floor itself that you can be heard. So spin around as much as you like on the floor from your rat spot, as you won't be heard at all. Unless you're in a bush, of course. On to number 8, which is jumping. Listening in on our test PMC, jumping into the air here, we went from 65 meters with the contact 4s down to 52 meters with none. And that's specifically for the landing. It doesn't really sound that loud when you jump in the first place, but once your feet land back on the floor, it's the classic "I've fallen off a step" sound effect that you get when people are going down mountains and cliff faces in Tarkov. This makes jumping one of the loudest effects in the game now, only beaten by running over weight. This makes vaulting much more valuable. Vaulting has a sound that is very similar to slow walking in terms of being heard. I tried to test it accurately, but I couldn't get the vaulting sound to play independent of even slow walking towards a barricade, so the range is likely approximately the same as that. This means we're talking along the lines of 45 meters. The point being, if you could be heard slow walking, then you can probably be heard vaulting too. So have a preference for vault if you can, rather than jumping if you're trying to minimize your sound profile, as you basically get 20 meters for free. Number 9 is on weapon mechanics. I looked at the ADS sound, which has been dramatically reduced since the last video I made on this. This one could be heard from 23 meters away using the Comtac 4s. Down to 21 with the Comtac 2s, and 18 meters with no headset. As I said, this is much shorter than it was before, which used to range anywhere from 30 up to 50, and is in fact smaller than the slow walk range with any headset, but longer than crouch walking, so I feel like that's relatively fair now. A couple of other weapon-specific actions, like change magnification, are actually louder at 28 meters down to 25 with no headset. For changing your fire mode from semi to full auto, for example, that goes from 27 meters to 25 meters. And zeroing your weapon is exactly the same. This one is quite misleading because it doesn't make any sound for you. So just remember that all these things do make noise: changing magnification, changing your fire mode, and changing your zero. There's another big culprit in this category that I actually didn't test last time, which is swapping between different scopes. So say you have an L-can or a canted sight on your weapon, you can switch between these sights without making any noise on your end, but this does make a noise for other people. So be very careful when you're swapping over from your canted to your LPVO, or when you're changing to a red dot mounted on top of your scope, because everybody else can hear you when you do that and you can't, which leads to the worst kinds of audio asymmetry. In the previous video that I did as well, I showed that you couldn't get out of ADS by blind firing any more to the side. So a few people asked me about the overhead blind fire, which... nope, that doesn't work. And by checking fire mode with the weapon, yeah, that doesn't work either. You always hear the un-ADS sound play, meaning that it's not possible to get out of ADS silently anymore. At least there wasn't a way that I could make it work, which is good. Number 10 is the out-of-breath sounds. I did a quick recheck of the out-of-breath stamina mechanics, and this still plays for both you and the other player when your leg stamina gets into the red. What I mean is that if you hold ADS all the way until your arm stamina goes to 0, it then starts draining your leg stamina instead. Only once your leg stamina reaches the red does it make any sound, and both people hear it, both you and your enemy. One interesting thing that I did find out is that holding breath out of breath sounds don't play for the other person. This is the hidden bar when you hold breath through a sight and run out of air, but you still have stamina left. You can make your PMC stop panting by using hold breath again after a few seconds, but if your stamina is still good, then your running out of breath sound doesn't actually play externally, which is pretty interesting. If you sprint down into the red though, and you've got that panting kind of sound effect, that does play for other people. Most of these sounds are matched up these days, and only a few things don't seem to be set right, which is quite comforting. Number 11 is our final one, and that is bag dropping during med animations. This can be a heal or using a stim before battle, which is usually when people do this one. Of course, you'll still make a medical sound for other people, but if your hands are busy like this when you discard the bag, then the bag quick drop sound doesn't happen. You can even use the hotkey for it. The main advantage here is that you don't let your opponent know where your bag got left if you die in the fight. So hopefully now you'll know what sounds you're making when to allow you to take down your opponents. As usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, and as always, have fun in your raids.